I'd like to introduce Anne to you. Anne is an emeritus professor at the University of Amsterdam and is also an extraordinary professor at our department, General Linguistics, here at Stellenbosch. She works and has been working for decades in child language acquisition, child language disorder, sign language studies, some other fields, but today her talk is specifically on children who are older and who have language problems and on the effect that that has outside of just linguistic problems that they might be experiencing. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you, Fernette, for the introduction. As Fernette said, I want to talk this morning about what I've called the invisible disability, language problems in children who are attending school. And this is coming from the fact that I'm collaborating with a project called Atlas, which is at the moment running in Europe, but intends to extend its scope further than that. And so I'm very pleased to be able to share this with you today. I think we all know that language proficiency is crucial. So here we have Atlas, which is the name of the project, and here we have language being the crucial part of Atlas. When children have language needs, increased language needs, there are a number of aspects which are related to that. So children can have developmental language disorder. They can also have medical conditions which affect language, so such as autism, ADHD, cognitive impairment, or hearing impairment. We also know that a low SES is related to some aspects of, well, special language support needed. Social deprivation is a factor. Multilingualism. Children do not have a language disorder when they are multilingual. You know, some people think that, but of course we know otherwise. But it does mean that there is a language need for both languages, or more than one languages need support in the school system. And just to make it more pertinent, the impact of COVID in South Africa, there's been an 8% drop in language test results, which is pretty shocking. And this article has reported on that. It is not just South Africa, in case you are worried. It is also in the US, in an article reported in the New York Times recently. So COVID has had a big impact. And just recently also talking about young children not being able to see articulation and facial expressions and so on. We are nevertheless today focusing on older children. So there are huge consequences for these needs, these language needs, when they're not identified and not met. So poor school performance. If a child needs language support, their school performance usually suffers. And international research shows that there's a big relationship between poor language skills, both comprehension and production, and low achievement across other school subjects. Just one reference there as an example from South Africa. Mental health issues. Children with hearing impairment and children with developmental language disorder have a higher frequency of mental health problems. For example, depression. And again, a lot of research out there, but just two references if you are interested in following that up. So poor school performance, mental health issues, antisocial behavior. There's a relationship between antisocial behavior and language skills. Again, a bulk of research in a study, now just a little bit older, but I don't think anything has changed. 80% of boys in an institution, as a result of their antisocial behavior, were found to have undiagnosed language problems. So, this is really shocking, and the average person does not know this. They just are completely unaware of this. Unemployment. Children who struggle with language at age 5 are twice as likely to be unemployed at 34. 34, that was just the age in the study. Nothing special about that age. That was a UK study. Criminal behavior. We've thought about antisocial behavior, but criminal behavior. So just looking, an untreated language need leads to school disengagement, leads to behavior and emotional trouble, leads to dropout and exclusion and to offending. And a UK study, not so old, showed that 60% of young offenders had developmental language disorder, and they're more likely to reoffend. Developmental language disorder was not being treated. You know, the young offenders are 16 and older, and they are not treated for their language problem or helped. So here you have the links across to offending. So from untreated language need across this chain to offending, and the UK study showing 60% of young offenders having developmental language disorder and being more likely to reoffend. In South Africa, this is the only study has shown that there's a significant difference in verbal IQ between young offenders and peer non-offenders, but not in performance IQ. In other words, it's not a general language disability, it is specifically in verbal. Okay, so this is the only study that I've been able to find which is considering verbal abilities in young offenders in South Africa, and it's showing the same effect as other studies, so the study in the UK. Okay, these are, this is really quite massive when you consider all these factors and the impact it's having. And of course, the consequence is the costs to society. And difficult to calculate, but this was done in a UK study in 2021. So for the UK, if these young people are not supported in their language development and language needs, there'll be a lifetime cost of £330 million per cohort. Cohort thinking, not quite sure exactly what their measure of cohort is, maybe every group of 10 years. And a cumulative effect across 4 cohorts of preschoolers, £1.2 billion. Now, we know, I think, that politicians, policymakers, and so on listen to economics. They will not necessarily listen to science, but they will listen to economics. So these are really important figures to be putting in front of the institutional leaders, the politicians, and so on. The Atlas project stands for Accessible Tools for Language Assessment in Schools. The goals are to pool resources across disciplines, because it's not just linguists. There's the social and health sciences, linguistics, speech and language therapy, education, and more, in order to improve research on the language needs of the age group 5 to 18 for screening and diagnosis, and to develop also therapy tools. Because, a therapy tool for a 5 to 18-year-old, for a 5-year-old is massively different from a 13-year-old, and again, different from an 18-year-old. So it's not just a case of developing one instrument. These are some of the people in the Atlas project. Maybe some of you recognize some of them. It's a big picture, but it indicates the range that were involved in the Atlas project. So, as again, speech, special education, speech and language therapy, linguists, and so on. Okay, and we met together in September in a workshop in Leiden in the Netherlands in order to think about how, as a group, we could try to make this an issue that people should become aware of. So the Atlas Project has a social agenda, which is to raise awareness and improve diagnosis for language needs in this age group, 5 to 18, and across populations of different types. And the Leiden Declaration, this sounds very grand, but it is quite an important declaration, which we've called Think Language. Here it's set out. So basically, we want all types of language needs to be recognized and understood, diagnosis for language difficulty that do not miss a single child, language difficulties to be fully acknowledged as a disability wherever appropriate, and every child who needs it to have access to adequate language. Okay, we know these are ideals, but this is what you have to go for to at least even try to be halfway. So with this declaration, the idea is to influence governments and policymakers in as many countries as possible to prioritize language needs, particularly in the group 5 to 18, because this is where a lot is being missed. To emphasize the benefits of interdisciplinary approach to assessment and support, and explain the importance of the school years. There's also a scientific agenda. The aim is to produce an overview paper of the screening and diagnostic schools for language needs in the age group, and clearly that would be per country, or more accurately per language. You know, what is there in a particular country for the languages in that country in terms of screening and diagnostic tools for this age group. Present the project at conferences in as many countries as possible, which is a bit of what I'm doing now, to stimulate also new research and to raise awareness in the scientific community. We talked about politicians under the social agenda, but also in the scientific community, and to stimulate endorsement of the manifesto and to stimulate new research. So the South African agenda, okay, this is more or less what I'm here to try and instigate, which is to bring the attention of the South African community to this age group. And I just, you know, me on my own are making some suggestions, right? So don't shoot me down. These are, I don't know whether it's feasible, but let's just see. So make an overview of the existing language instruments for languages for ages 5 to 18. So you have to think about the type of instruments, the age range, and available for which South African languages, which of course is a huge task, including South African Sign Language. And publication by Frenette and her colleague in 2014 did quite a bit of that. But of course, that was in 2014. We're 8 years further down the line. But just taking some examples, you've got, for example, sentence repetition task. This is testing grammatical abilities. So there's a paper in 2015 on sentence repetition tasks and their use in diagnosis and also screening, since they're fairly quick to do. They can be used across this age range if you have age-appropriate vocabulary. Where are these available? It is available for South African English, Afrikaans, and for sign language of South African Sign Languages in preparation. So it's almost complete. But of course, a lot of languages to go. So it's okay. Example 2, the non-word repetition task, examining phonological abilities. Age range also can be used in this age range. It's there for English, South African English, Northern Sotho and Setswana, maybe other languages, but I couldn't find more. And interesting is actually from the Litmus, which was a project, there's the non-word repetition, which is not specific to a particular language. It's looking at more universal properties of phonology. And that is maybe a way to go, which is described in the paper by Shula Chiat from 2015. We've got the main for narrative abilities, also came out of the Big Cross project that we had back in 2014, 15, 16. It's for narrative abilities. It can be used 6 to 18, although personally I'm not sure that the pictures are maybe appropriate for the older section of that population, but the type of stories used involves 6 pictures, and the participant is asked to tell the story from those pictures. You know, you can clearly make pictures which are suitable for the age range. It is available for Afrikaans and English, and the picture elicitation material has also been adapted to the South African context. I'm looking at Frenette because that, yes, okay, thank you. Okay, and example 4, vocabulary and literacy test, which I don't personally know, but this was developed by Kunze 2015, the lower age range, and this is available for Zulu and English, and it seems to be mainly aimed at pragmatics. although vocabulary is in there too, and it's production and comprehension. But as I say, I don't personally know this test. But in other words, there are instruments out there which could be adapted to the other South African languages, but there needs to be a real push to get this moving forward. Otherwise, a large group of children will not be able to be screened in schools. And this is basically, I think, what would be advisable. So maybe working groups to fill in the gaps, remembering the importance of interdisciplinary work. So it's not just the linguists, it's also the educationalists, the speech and language therapists. And what really are the priorities in the South African context? I don't pretend to know exactly what these are, but I think it could be a task for the group to work out what the priorities are and what should be done first. The social agenda, certainly, I think a concerted effort can now be made to bring the individual and social and economic costs to the attention of government, policymakers, parents, and so on. And the Atlas material is there, so the manifesto is there, it's in English, maybe it needs to be translated to other languages to make it accessible to parents. And the aim of the Atlas project is actually to elicit commitment to the manifesto. So the manifesto is going to be spread via social media and so on, with a link to the website, which is still just now being constructed, so people can say, we commit to this. And then with this international commitment, then this also gives you an instrument to put pressure on government and policymakers. So thank you very much. These were my ideas. I hope I can stimulate the group to be thinking about these issues and to move forward.
Thank you very much for a really important, great talk. I mean, this is really very motivating, I think, for us. I wondered about the tests that have been adapted, whether for South Africa, for African languages, whether any have been yet, because that is so important. But it takes a lot of money and a lot of work, as we know, because we're busy with doing this for 8 to 30-month children. So very important. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Heather. As far as I know, none of these tests have been normed. And of course, this is part of the social agenda to make the governments and education authorities and so on aware of the importance of doing regular screening of children at school with respect to their language abilities in the different home languages. And in order to do that, clearly you need norms. And this is a big issue, but it's one that has to be pushed literally down the throats of the policymakers, because if they look at the figures about what this is costing society, then this is the only thing that works. You can really bash people over the head with these figures. Bernard?
And yes, I have a question comment. It's a comment about a catch-22. So we need to identify the children in order to provide suitable intervention. Now, not all of the intervention will necessarily be provided by speech language therapists. There could also be intervention by educationists, remedial teachers, psychologists. But because it is primarily a language problem, it would be inconceivable that there would be very few children who would need speech language intervention. So we're thinking that speech language therapists are needed. I was trying to find the latest figures online for how many speech language therapists are registered in South Africa, but I couldn't. If I have to venture a guess, it would be something like 2,500. But after my question, I will check and see how, and we have a population of, shall we just say, several million. So now you identify the children, and there are no service providers, and those who are speech language therapists are concentrated in urban areas where, yes, sure, there are also lots of children concentrated there, but the rural areas are grossly underserviced. So my question and comment in all woven together is, Okay, so we develop the tools and we identify the children, and then what then? Should one have that pessimistic, completely but a realistic outlook, or should we say, well, if we have the tools and we identify the children and there are no support services, that actually strengthens our case that diagnosis can only happen with appropriate tools. And then there should also be funds available, not just for test development and yes, test norming, but also for training more speech language therapists. How do other countries deal with this dilemma?
Thank you, Fernette. I think that's a really important question. There's a whole chain. Once you have screened and picked out those children who have language needs, not necessarily, if you like, the two standard deviations, whether you'd say they have a disorder, but they certainly are weak in language. I think definitely this puts the training and numbers of speech and language therapists also has to be on the agenda, but I also think it puts on the agenda something called remedial teaching, which happens in schools and where teachers too, if they have to be involved in administering these screening instruments, which means automatically their awareness of the language needs of particular children in the class, they need to be assisted to know, this child definitely needs to go to a speech and language therapist, but there's maybe also remedial teaching which can take place in the classroom to support the language needs of those individuals, because it's not getting more speech and language therapists is not done overnight, right? It's a long-term thing. But I think in terms of teacher awareness, this is also an additional route to follow. Are there more questions from people online?
Hi, Anne, it's Yuanine speaking. I think it's also important when Fernette speaks about the idea of just finding out how many speech therapists are trained. Lately in the news, we've also heard that we actually don't have enough teachers and not even remedial teachers. So I think it goes beyond the point of just looking at in our discipline, but looking overall that if you don't have enough teachers, you don't have enough, or you've got too many students in a class, so then even just a teacher trying to identify without the aid of a remedial teacher or a speech language therapist, that's going to be very hard. And I recently also saw an article where the government is moving early childhood development. I know we're talking about late childhood development, but they're also moving early childhood development from social development into the education system and ministry. So there's a lot of changes coming. And I think that we kind of have to think broader and further than just what we can do in the field, and interdisciplinary work I think is very important.
Yes, I think you've made some very valuable points there. And clearly, without enough teachers in schools and too large classes, this is a very important factor, I think, not only in South Africa, in many other countries. Nevertheless, I think we shouldn't be discouraged. We have to try.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any more questions?
Thank you, Anne, for a nice talk. I wanted to ask about one of those points in the declaration or manifesto that was classify language difficulties as a disability, right? I wanted to ask a bit more about the rationale for that, because it seems like it's quite a big step, and I would like to hear the reasoning behind it.
I think this has to do with the terminology that's used in legislation. As soon as a particular aspect of development, when it's outside, if you like, the normal range, when it can be classified as a disability, this gives access to support, funding, and so on. So that, I think, is why it is to be fully acknowledged as a disability has consequences in terms of social support, financing, and so on. I think that's the reason for that formulation. Yeah, okay, thank you.
And if I may, could you give us an update on the status of the Atlas project? So you have ideals, you have a manifesto, you have a sort of an action plan, but on the ground, where are things at, in which countries, and what is being done?
At the moment, if you like, the central committee, to call it that, is busy constructing the website. Then there will be the publication of using social media and any available instrument for spreading the information, that the website will be made then accessible to people. The manifesto will be sent around, and then it is the task within individual countries to actually approach their government and policymakers with this manifesto. And the idea is that with the number of signatures that you can get on such a manifesto, that this is strengthening your arm. So it really is at the beginning, but obviously I will keep you updated with what happens. There's also an email address on the last slide for the Atlas project. And yeah, as soon as the manifesto is there, then I will circulate it so that it can be used in the South African context. We only met in September, so taking a little bit of while to implement everything, but it's definitely on the way.
And I'm going to use the opportunity to inform those who are interested of something that Michelle Pascoe and Heather Brooks set up, Child Language Africa. Heather said it's going to become the child development node, but there is a portion of that where Michelle Pascoe has systematically looked at what is available out there in terms of language assessment and language intervention in the various South African languages. So it's very neatly done, with whom you can take up contact if you're interested in it. It doesn't look only at screening and diagnostic tools, and it's not to 5 to 16 year age range. So it goes. But she's done a lot of work also going into speech language therapy departments, seeing which students have maybe started doing work on developing, adapting an instrument. It hasn't been standardized norm, anything like that, but it's not a choral translation of an instrument. That might be worth our while to go and look there as well at what has been started. But it's often the case of one person doing it and then it's left because it's an MA student who leave academia to work in industries.
Yes, thank you. I am aware of Michelle's website, but I think this in terms of the node that now exists, that there should be links to her website so that none of the work which is being done gets lost, because this can so easily happen with master theses and PhD theses and so on. Keeping and archiving and preserving the information is really very important.
I would like to thank you, Anne. This is the first talk that we host as part of the Child Language Development Node. Those of you who are interested in the node, welcome to send us an email. You can just send it to Lauren Onrod, who sent you the invitation to the talk, and she will forward it to Heather and to me. We're very excited and feel privileged to host that SADILAR funded node. So we hope that our next talk as part of the node will be less eventful technically. We thank you for really making it worth our while to grind and bear with the technical difficulties. Thank you. It's been very informative, and we will be watching the Atlas project and seeing where we can become. Thank you very much, Anne.
You're welcome.
Thanks, colleagues.